Well, welcome to another edition of the College 12 Pack. I am your host, Patrick Kahn, senior editor of the College Wires. With me, as always, Tyler Natuno of LSU Tigers Wire for the win. And Tyler, it's over. Basketball is over. It's finally done. We're going to talk a little bit about basketball. First half of the show, mostly college basketball, coaching carousel updates. We'll talk about the championship games. And then we're going to go back to football, our bread and butter, what everybody looks forward to in the springtime after the madness ends, so to speak. You have your storylines that are going on with spring football. We'll dive into your Florida Gators. We'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the SEC as well as ACC and surrounding Big Ten, obviously. Got to talk about them. They got 4 new teams coming in as well. But let's kick things off with UConn winning their second straight national championship. I know you were disappointed because you wanted Florida to be the last team to do it. But I digress. UConn won. And while it was a close game early on, UConn does what they always do. That's pull away, win by double digits. I have to say the last 2 years watching UConn win national championships had to be probably one of the most boring that I can remember just because they blow everybody out. And hats off, and I'm gonna give a little golf clap to Dan Hurley for the job that he's doing because he has his team ready to play, and they beat who's in front of them, so you can't really knock him for it.
Yeah, no, 100%. Look, it was a little sad for me as a Gators fan, but I can't be too mad about it. They absolutely deserved it. There's really no arguing with it. This is one of the most impressive 2-year runs we've seen. The most impressive 2-year run we've seen since Florida did it. And they even, ran through these tournaments with pretty much no complications at all, which Florida wasn't even able to do. So, I think this game played out more or less kind of how I thought it would. I think maybe the one thing that surprised me a little bit was just how good Zach Edey looked early in the game. Like, not that I didn't think he would look good, but I thought he would struggle a little more than he did. I think he showed an element on offense in the post that we hadn't necessarily really seen. I think he really took over that game in the opening minutes. He wasn't able to keep that up. I think he pretty clearly would have needed to score 40 plus points if they were going to win that game. And they didn't really get enough going on, outside of him. I think UConn's just too well coached. Dan Hurley just done such a great job with this team. They're always in position. They're always putting pressure on you. They fly around, even late in the games. They're just, you can just tell it's a very connected group. It's the kind of team that really is poised to dominate in college basketball. So, and that's what they did ultimately after a tight first half.
It kind of felt like Dan Hurley basically said, look, Zach Edey's going to get his. Nobody else is scoring. And that's kind of how it felt. And that's a great game plan if you can keep your second, third options off the scoreboard. And they were able to do that. Like I said, it was close. But again, just hats off to the job they did. And you're right, one of the most impressive 2-year runs. Interesting enough, could be the beginning or continuation of a dynasty, because if you think back to 1999, there have been 23 national champions and 26%, so more than a quarter, belong to the UConn Huskies. Just phenomenal job with what they've been doing, and just absolutely hats off, like you said. I'm interested to see if they can get the three-peat. Something we haven't seen since UCLA in the 60s and 70s with, I believe it was like 6 straight championships, and they won like 8 out of 9. It was absolute dominance of what they did in UCLA. Obviously, John Wooden was a big part of that. Let's talk about the women's basketball. We obviously had South Carolina hoping that they could continue on their perfect season. They've lost 1 game in 2 years, and that came at the hands of the Iowa Hawkeyes in last year's Final Four. This year, they got the Hawkeyes in the championship game, and much like last year, the SEC reigns supreme, and they're able to withstand the Iowa Hawkeyes. Caitlin Clark, despite scoring 30 in this game, it felt like she had a lot less because it just felt like they were able to kind of slow her down, and that is why South Carolina ended the season with a perfect record, and Dawn Staley secured her 3rd national championship.
Yeah, I mean, I said when we talked about when we previewed the Final Four last week that I thought that Dawn Staley, if she got the opportunity against this Iowa team, would do a better job of defending Caitlin Clark than LSU did in that Elite Eight game, and they did. Like you said, she got 30. I mean, you can't completely contain Caitlin Clark. She's going to score on you. But I think in the first half, they really did a good job, especially. And I think what was really, to me, actually impressive about Iowa was, in spite of that, they hung in there. They actually controlled this game for a while early on. South Carolina kind of had to come back in the first half. And, I think that really goes to show that this isn't just a Caitlin Clark team. Those other players on Iowa did a really good job. And Kate Martin had 16 points. Like, I think that they proved that they're more than just Caitlin Clark. But with that being said, there isn't a Caitlin Clark player or a non-Caitlin Clark player on this Iowa team that would start on South Carolina, I don't think. And I think we really saw that. I think we saw the talent discrepancy, and especially with a player like Camila Cardozo. Stoke did a good job, but I don't think that they have anyone. I don't know if anyone has anyone that can slow down Camila Cardozo. She's such a force in the paint, just so physically dominant at 6'7". So I think this game more or less played out how I thought it would. I think Iowa gave them their strongest punch. I think Iowa played the kind of game they needed to win, and it just wasn't enough.
And a lot of people tuned in for this game. Saw the numbers. 19 million viewers for this game, 24.1 million in the final 15 minutes of this game. Just shows you the eyeballs that were on this, because I felt like you were tuning in for two reasons. Either A, you wanted to see Caitlin Clark win, or you wanted to see her lose. I'm not saying that there aren't women basketball fans out there, but I think predominantly because of the numbers they've been putting up. Because if you look at the numbers, it really speaks to Caitlin Clark, I think. Because if you look at all the best rated games, especially the last couple of seasons, they all involve the Iowa Hawkeyes, and just, tremendously what she's done. And I love what Dawn Staley said after winning the championship. She was like, hats off. She's congratulating, Caitlin Clark for the job that she did in raising the game, which I think is perfect. And, I think they also understand what she meant to the game. And there's a big reason why I think everybody knows the Indiana Fever are going to be drafting number 22 and number 1 overall in the WNBA draft.
Yeah, I want to say it was either the Vegas Aces or is that the Las Vegas Aces? Yeah, or the Phoenix Mercury. One of the two. They already have moved their game against the Indiana Fever to a bigger arena. Yeah, I'm sorry, it was Vegas, because they're moving it to T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. So they've already moved that game to a bigger arena. They're already marketing. I saw they put out a graphic that was like a silhouette with a number 22 jersey on it. Like, they're already marketing as if she's a member of the Indiana
Fever. NFL, step up your game. Why are you not already marketing Caleb Williams with Chicago Bears? I mean, we should be doing the same thing. Yes, I think that's just shows you the popularity, the cultural phenomenon that is Caitlin Clark. And, it'll be interesting to see like how it looks next year in women's college basketball. But it's going to take a special talent, I think, because I don't think I've ever seen a player, especially on the women's side, selling out arenas like just for regular season games. So, I mean, they sold out all of their games on the road.
Selling out road arenas, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's like people are flocking to see her. So, like I said, and I hate that kind of Caitlin Clark kind of became the story. Especially, it's like people are saying, hey, y'all know South Carolina won. But it kind of speaks to how her popularity. But again, I'm interested to know where you kind of sit here. Where do you rank Dawn Staley among women's coaches right now? Top 2, top 3?
I mean,
current coaches.
I think, yeah. I mean, like, if you're asking who I'd rather have, like, I mean, obviously you can't take anything away from Gino Auriemma. Like, what he's done is absolute legend status. But if you're asking me, I'm picking a coach right now to win the national championship in 2025. Yeah, I'm probably going Dawn Staley. I mean, what she's done at South Carolina, a non-traditional basketball power, turned them into, and she hasn't really done it either with like super heavy use of the portal or anything like that. And I mean, she lost She lost, I believe, every member of the starting 5 from last year's team that went undefeated and lost in the Final Four. Lost all of them, I believe, and they still went back, ran it back, and had an even better season. It's unbelievable what she's done, and she's only 53.
And also she did lose Aaliyah Boston, who was the number 1 overall pick last year and won WNBA Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
And now she's probably going to be teaming up with Caitlin Clark at Indiana, which is interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, when you look at that, there's really nothing more impressive than what she did this year in the turnaround. And like I said, she's only 53. She's already got 3 national titles. She sits tied for 4th on the list in all-time titles. And she's probably going to get up. I mean, she's probably going to get at least 2 more. I mean, she's won 3 since 2017. I mean, this is a up and coming dynasty that's maybe in the early throes of it. I mean, this could go on. This could be, I don't even know. This could be the beginning of a Baylor or UConn type run for South Carolina.
It could be. Let me throw a mind blowing stat at you. How about in the last 3 years, Dawn Staley has lost 3 games.
I mean, that's unbelievable.
As a head coach.
Yeah. What's like 130 wins or something crazy like that? 110 wins. I don't know. So over 100 wins. Yeah.
She was 35-2 in the 2021-22 season. 36-1 last year, the only loss being to Caitlin Clark in Iowa. And then 38-0 just last year. So just amazing. She had more losses in 2020 to 2021 than she did the last 3 years combined. It was 5-3. That just shows you the level she was, and it was even a Final Four year. And she probably would have won the title in 2020 had it not been canceled due to COVID. So, Dawn Staley, great coach. I think she's top 3 for sure. I mean, Gino Auriemma, Kim Mulkey, as far as current coaches, Dawn Staley. Those are the 3.
She outcoached Mulkey twice this year, once last year too. I mean, if they had met up if they had beaten Iowa, this is all speculative. But I mean, if they had beaten Iowa last year, judging by the way the LSU South Carolina game went, I don't think LSU wins the national title if they have to play South Carolina.
Maybe not. So. Maybe not. All right, so let's move on to some coaching changes. We got some coaching carousel. Now, obviously, the head coach, Andy Eifield, left USC to take the job at SMU. Made me scratch my head because I'm thinking, is SMU a better job? Well, SMU's in the ACC. It's a more they will be in the ACC next year, which is a very strong basketball conference. Mind you, they're going to have to play against the team that's many are calling the favorite to win it all next year, Duke. But USC had to make a change, and they went and grabbed Eric Musselman. And this is interesting to me. I think Eric Musselman is a really good coach. I really do. The dynamic between him and the Hog fans has always struck me as a little weird. So I wasn't surprised that he took the job at USC. I just felt like that was a weird situation that the only outcome had to be for him to leave.
Yeah. I mean, we mentioned this when we talked about the possibility of this happening last week, but this is a guy who I've heard his name just be sort of tossed in for a lot of jobs this cycle, like enough jobs that it kind of raises some eyebrows. Like, what kind of feelers is this guy putting out? Does he want to leave? I don't know how desperately he wanted to leave. I mean, I think USC is pretty clearly a better job. I think Arkansas is a good job. I think it's a better job than it was when he took it. But you're still, from a resources game, you're still in, I would say, at least the second tier of the SEC, probably. I think, coming off a rough year, it makes sense that he would make this move. He's a guy with West Coast ties, by the way. I mean, that's kind of where, most of his background is. So I think I get it in a lot of ways. I think it's a really interesting move for USC too. I think it shows that, Andy Enfield leaving was more about him than it was about USC, because they go out and make a splashy hire. I'm really just curious what this program is. I think it's got a lot of the same sort of questions we asked when the Washington job opened. This is an enticing program, enticing location, a lot of resources, but it's also moving to a very loaded Big Ten conference, a conference with a lot of historical basketball success. This program doesn't exactly have that. So I'm curious if this is a team that's set to, make a leap joining the Big Ten, or if it's more going to fall toward, fall more into the middle of the pack.
Yeah, it's going to be. I think it's going to be tough sledding in year one with the roster turnover. Obviously, Bronny James, who's entered the transfer portal. Does he withdraw his name and stay in LA? Does he? I believe he's also declared for the NBA draft.
Yeah, he could just go and sign undrafted with the Lakers if he wanted to.
He could do that, or a team could draft Bronny James and then say, "Hey, LeBron, why don't you come play with your son?"
That too. There's a lot of there's a lot of ways the Bronny saga could play out, and it probably won't have a resolution for a while.
But when on paper, I love this hire. Like, I think Musselman can bring something, because the one thing that he can do is tell guys, when he's on the recruiting trails, look, I get guys to the NBA. Like, because he showed it at Arkansas, of all places. He was showing guys he could get guys to the NBA. A lot of one and done guys, but if he has that kind of resume, it's very similar to what Lincoln Riley can offer with all the quarterbacks and the Heismans and the top draft picks. So he's going to be a great calling card for both the football and the basketball programs there in Southern California. So that, not a big surprise. Now, the bigger surprise to me was who's replacing Musselman there in Arkansas. And they didn't go far. They went to Lexington, Kentucky, and got John Calipari, who hasn't had a lot of success in recent years. We're talking, this last year in the NCAA tournament, he got bounced in the first round by Oakland, which was a shock to many. There were very few upsets in the tournament. This was one of them. And I felt like a 3 drop falling to a 14 is just wild to me. But it kind of seems like, and you correct me if I'm wrong, it kind of like Musselman at Arkansas. It kind of felt like Calipari in Kentucky kind of had this weird thing going on. And a lot of fans didn't even know Calipari was going to return next year. And then they came out and said he is, and now he's off to Arkansas.
Yeah. I won't pretend that this is something that I saw coming. I was very surprised when these reports started coming out. But, I think the more you take a step back and look at it and think about it, it makes a lot more sense. I think that, first of all, like you said, he almost got fired. He almost did not come back to Kentucky this year. There was a multi-day stretch where there was a lot of uncertainty with his future. There was a meeting with Mitch Barnhart, the AD. We didn't really know what the result of that meeting was going to be. We knew it was going to be a tough meeting. They chose to come, to run it back, but I'm not sure either side was particularly thrilled with that decision and the way that things have sort of played out. I think this marriage kind of started to sour back when they lost as the 2 seed to St. Peter's a couple years back. I think that was sort of the turning point with Cal and Kentucky. And now, he's got the opportunity to go to a solid SEC job, kind of ride it off into the sunset, see what he can do. I'm just really curious, with the issues we've, seen Kentucky start to have over the last couple of years. Can he replicate the success he's had at a non-blue blood program? Can he recruit at that level? Can he get that talent in the building when it's Arkansas and not Kentucky? I think he probably can, but I think it's a fair question. I think from what I heard, one of the big sort of things they needed to get squared away when coming to this agreement was, could he bring his high school class from Kentucky to Arkansas? So, the fact that they came to an agreement, is pretty telling, I think, on what sort of level he could potentially recruit at here. But I think it's a fair question, especially considering it's not like things were going incredibly smoothly those last couple of years in Lexington.
Yeah, I think there's some name power, right? We talk about names in college basketball. Coach Cal is the name that people know. So I think there's that aspect of it. But you bring up a good point. He has been recruiting well at Kentucky. They haven't been seeing the success. And now he's just moving from one SEC team to another. But it'd be interesting to see how that all plays out. Like I said, I think he has the name power. But again, I'm also very cautious with what kind of success he can have given the lack of success that he's had in recent years. I really don't think since 2017 he's gotten out of He's made it past the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. It's really been tough sledding for him. I would like to see how he's able to recruit, how he's able to develop guys. It's a good hire. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a good hire, but I'm cautious on how well I think this goes. Which brings us to our next topic: who replaces Coach Cal? We've heard some names tossed around. One name that I think is interesting. Maybe he wants to get out of his current gig, Billy Donovan. I think you've heard that name before. You might be familiar with him. Might rub some Florida fans the wrong way if he took the job there. But if he's wanting to get away from the Bulls, which seems to be a rough situation, that would be a name that I would kick around. Despite I think we all know that it kind of seems like it's Scott Drew's kind of job to turn down at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Billy's sort of the white whale here. I think he's the one that like you have to try because the worst you can do is say no. I don't really expect that. I think that, first of all, he's turned Kentucky down before. They tried to hire him when they hired John Calipari. He turned it down. Not to say he wouldn't do it now. I don't think that's not the point I'm trying to make. But, there is some precedent for it. And to be honest, I think he's gotten what he wanted when he left Florida to go to the NBA. It didn't exactly work out in OKC, but he's been an NBA head coach now for 9 years. That's what he wanted. He's kind of gotten into that fraternity. He's probably not going to lose his job in Chicago, but even if he did, he'd probably get another in the NBA. So I'm not saying that doesn't mean he'd want to come back. Now with NIL, it's not as difficult. Recruiting's a little less, time intensive. It's more just about resources. So I could see it. I think it's a lot less likely than some other options. I mean, I think you mentioned the top one. I think their first choice was probably Nate Oates. He's withdrawn from consideration, and that buyout was probably going to be prohibitive from the get-go. Drew makes a lot of sense. He's got the cheapest buyout of the guys they're talking about. We'll see. He posted a picture this morning as we're recording of what seemed to be in a restaurant in Waco. And then, online message board sleuths are trying to prove that the picture wasn't from today. And they're calling the restaurant, trying to see if he was there, normal college sport fan behavior. So we'll see what ends up happening as far as that goes. I mean, if he says no, do you kind of circle back and maybe just throw the bag at Dan Hurley? I mean, a guy that was only making $5 million this year at UConn just got a raise from winning the championship, but I've heard they could offer him up to like $12 million. UConn's not going to match that. That's generational wealth. So, maybe that's an option.
Well, if you listen to Dan Hurley, you got to ask Mrs. Hurley.
Again, ask Mrs. Hurley about the $5 million annual raise, and we'll see.
I mean, if you could double it, I mean, I think you have to at least try.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we know you said this in an interview, but let's talk about numbers here. I think it makes sense. Scott Drew probably is their number one, and like you said, for various reasons. Why? Well, he's cheapest. When you look at the buyout information. Well, the great thing for Kentucky is they got out of the Calipari contract without having to do a buyout.
Yeah.
So they're doing well there. Obviously Dan Hurley, he's the top guy. You brought up Nate Oates. They're not going to do it. There's Billy Donovan. There's Scott Drew. Do you potentially look over at Auburn and look at Bruce Pearl? He's a guy that I would look at. I think the longest of long shots is probably Jay Wright.
Yeah.
I've heard people bring him up, and I've brought him up in the past on some of these jobs. I don't know that he would do it. He's kind of one of those names out there. The name that I really like, and I think not a lot of people are talking about, is maybe Mark Pope from BYU.
Yeah.
He's the guy that I'd look at. Mark Few at Gonzaga. Again, you're talking about more money than Gonzaga could possibly match. Might be the way to go there, but those would be names that I would look at.
Yeah, I mean, I think Pope would maybe be a nice under the radar kind of move. Obviously Mark Few, a lot of success there. I think Jay Wright, I'm kind of with you. I think, he's been pretty clear the reasons why he left college basketball. And if he had those problems at a job like Villanova, I don't really see why he'd want to come coach at Kentucky. I think that, sorry, who was the first name you mentioned? I'm trying to remember what you were saying.
I had Mark Pope and Pugh.
Yeah, Jay Wright. Yeah,
Bruce Pearl.
Bruce Pearl. Yeah, thank you. That's what I want to say. Yeah, I mean, Bruce Pearl, that was kind of a name that first came to mind when this happened. There hasn't been a lot of smoke there, so I'm kind of doubting that's going to happen. And truth be told, I think a Kentucky pursuit of Bruce Pearl, I think all that would really accomplish is getting Bruce Pearl what he's always really wanted at Auburn, which seems to be a promised coach in waiting job for his son.
Yeah.
I think if anything, a Kentucky pursuit of Bruce Pearl would probably just lead to him getting the leverage to get the lifetime contract at Auburn he wants.
Yeah, no, I think you made some valid points there. Pope makes sense for me because he's a Kentucky guy. He's been at, BYU for 5 years or so. The results aren't great, but also BYU is not really known for their basketball prowess. I think they've been pretty good the last few years, though. But you bring in a guy who's a Kentucky guy, I think that might help things a lot when you're looking at your next head coach. And obviously, I think Pugh is another one of those guys who kind of like Hurley, you can kind of throw the checkbook at, so to speak. And the school's not going to really be able to match it because Gonzaga doesn't have that kind of money. But those are some names that I would look at. But as we recorded this, there's been no deal made for any of these coaches, and we'll continue to monitor it as it moves forward. Now I wanted to jump into some football talk, and we're going to kick it off with some Florida Gator talk. I know you get excited every time we're doing Florida Gator talk. So a couple of things. Going into the season, I feel like there's two storylines I care about. Quarterback DJ Lagway. Not to say Mertz is bad or what have you, but I feel like Lagway's the future, and you'll agree with that. I know you will.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
And then the other thing is, how much is the pressure going to bother Billy Napier this year? If you look at Florida Gators football schedule, it is brutal. Like I look at it and, I have a hard time finding a way to get to 6. How do you get to 6 wins with that schedule? And I know there's going to be a lot of moving parts, and the transfer portal is about to open again. They can make some changes, but I'm looking at it going, I see 5 wins max. What do you got for me, Tyler?
It's hard to really dispute anything that you just said. I think, this is such an important year for Billy. I think he came in and was very clear from the get-go that this was going to be a long-term rebuilding job. It wasn't going to happen overnight. And that's fine. And I think for the most part, I think the fan base accepted that. I think they understood the roster situation that Dan Mullen left and knew that it wasn't great. And I think they saw a guy who had some really nice early returns in recruiting and has continued to recruit well. And I think that's led to some promise. But all of a sudden, it's year 3. This guy's 11-14. You got to start winning now. You're not going to get a year 4 if you don't start winning now. And like you said, the schedule is what makes this so tough because this team could improve markedly. This could be a much better team this year than it was last year, and they could go 6-6. And I don't think that's enough for Billy Napier to get a year 4, which is why, this is just a really, really tough deal for him. I think it's a bit unfortunate that this has been the draw in the schedule this year because I do think there's reasons to be a bit optimistic. Lagway, look, we've seen some clips out of spring that are really encouraging with Lagway, but the fact of the matter is he's not going to play unless things get into a really desperate situation for either the team or Billy Napier personally, because Graham Mertz has his limitations, but he was far from the problem that the Gators had last year. He was more than good enough to win more than 5 games. So I think that the real question is this defense improved? They've added some guys, they brought in Ron Roberts from Auburn, to kind of help oversee that unit. We'll see if they can take a step. But with that schedule, with the fact that last year's recruiting class kind of fell apart, I don't think there's a coach in America that's on a hotter seat going into 2024 than Billy Napier. And he's probably the one that would be the safest bet to be the first power conference coach to lose their job, just looking at what that schedule looks like.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I agree about Lagway too. My excitement level is being a Texas guy and watching this kid play in high school. Dude's the real deal. Like I firmly believe that he has the ability to create with his legs, be able to throw. So like for me, as we head to the spring game, I just kind of want to watch him make some plays.
Yeah.
Make some highlight level plays. Just to give you a little bit of excitement, especially for Florida fans, knowing that this year's going to be tough. You're welcoming Oklahoma and Texas into the fold at the SEC.
They got to go play at Texas, by the way.
Yeah, they have to play in Austin,
Yeah.
which is a tough place to play. And that place is going to be rocking 100,000 plus people. And I would say the heat's going to be a factor, but they play in a swamp. The heat's not going to be a factor for them.
Yes, I guarantee you, Austin will not be as bad as Gainesville, Florida. Whenever that.
Well, probably not because you don't have the humidity levels of the swamp.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's going to be tough. The SEC is going to be tough, and honestly, my thing is they need progress, right? Here's progress. Billy, can you go 500 in SEC play? You've been 3-5 the last 2 years. Can you go 4-4? Give them something to kind of build on. I mean, that's not great by Florida standards. I mean, a team that's won national championships, that's played for national championships. So going 500 in SEC play is not exactly thrilling, but at this point, that's what they need.
Yeah, I mean, they have to look at this year on a sliding scale to an extent. I mean, if he goes 10-2 this year, that's like extend this guy for 5 years territory. I mean, that would be an unbelievable feat with this schedule to win double-digit games. I think something along the lines of 8-4 is probably very nice progress. Given what I mean, if you go 8, if you're looking at the schedule, try to find 8 wins, and if you can find a way to get 8 wins that doesn't impress you, like I'd be curious to hear it because I don't see a way.
My question: if somebody looked at that schedule, had 8 wins, and that said it didn't impress them, I would tell them, okay, now open your eyes and look again because you clearly weren't looking. Because that schedule, we're not going to get into it right now, but it is brutal. We'll probably get into that into a future episode. Well, sticking in the SEC, let's talk about the Alabama Crimson Tide. They've got a big change this year. No longer will they be led by Nick Saban. It's now Kalen DeBoer, a guy that I know you were really high on at Washington all of last season. Every time we talked, he was the guy that you wanted to talk about and the job that he did with that whole team. I mean, they were fantastic. Made it all the way to a national championship game, just wasn't meant to be. But as we look at Alabama with this new staff and everything, what is it you're looking for? Are you looking to – for me, it's how does Jalen Milroe fit in this offense that's going to be completely different because he is far from what Michael Penix Jr. was the last 2 years. He's a little more athletic, a little less of a passer, but I'd be really interested to see kind of what you're trying to gauge this on, or are you more looking on the defensive side of the ball? Because Kalen DeBoer can put together an offense. He's done it year after year after year. Is it more you're looking at the defense and the job that Kane Womack's got to do?
I actually think despite DeBoer's offensive background, I think I probably have a little more faith in the defense. They were really good this past year. Obviously, you're going to lose losing some guys to the draft, losing even more to the portal. Like obviously losing Caleb Downs to Ohio State. But I think that, my biggest questions are kind of twofold with this team. But first of all, on the field, how do you manage the losses? Because they lost a lot. I mean, as soon as Saban retired, a lot of guys hit the portal, and he's bringing some guys with him. He's landed some guys, but I think that it's a question. And I think that, outside of Jalen Milroe, who was very inconsistent last year, showed flashes of being a really good playmaker, but I think a guy that it's hard to have an absurd amount of faith in coming into this season, a guy that needs to improve. I have some questions about that offense. And I just think in general, to me, I'm very curious the identity this program has in the post Nick Saban era. I mean, I think it's already, to me, just a few weeks into spring practice, it's very clear that the vibes around this team are different. I mean, they've got Roll Tide Willie showing up at practices. I mean, would Nick Saban have in a million years, exactly, And I'm not even saying this is a criticism or a value judgment on DeBoer. He's trying to do something different, and that's fine. If he tried to be Nick Saban, it would be a disaster. So that's fine. I'm not criticizing it, but I'm just curious, what this program looks like without Nick Saban. And then say they do, maybe fall off just to like 9-3 or 8-4 levels. How is that received? I don't know.
Heads will roll
if they probably go 8-4, which isn't fair, but probably.
No, it's not. It's not. And if you wanted to keep the Nick Saban culture, you should have hired one of his disciples.
Yeah, and that's gone great for pretty much everyone except Georgia, right?
I mean, Texas seems to be doing okay.
Yeah. If you want to count Sark as a Saban,
I would. Yeah, I mean, I know he didn't come up in the Nick Saban system, but he's a disciple of him. Well, let's talk about Penn State now. They've had some changes. They got a new offensive coordinator, Andy Ketelnicki, who comes over from Kansas. Did a wonderful job, I think, with the Kansas Jayhawks and Jalen Daniels, and he's gonna be working with a former 5-star quarterback in Drew Allar. What's interesting is I had this narrative in my mind that Drew Allar was not very good last year. It literally was 2 games. He had 2 bad games. It just so happened to be against Michigan and Ohio State.
Yeah, which is kind of a caveat there.
A guy that throws 25 touchdowns and 2 interceptions, that's a pretty good year. But I think he can elevate his game, and I wonder if Ketelnicki is the guy that gets it out of him.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers were not bad for Allar. Like, that's not the problem here. I would say he was almost efficient to a fault, though. I think that's not. I mean, I would say if you're only throwing 2 interceptions, I would even argue that's maybe not good.
You might be risk adverse.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of that was the offense too. I think the offense had a lot of issues with the way it was run this year. So I like the Ketelnicki move. I think the vision here, like, I've got to give James Franklin credit. After a massively disappointing season, he did not sit on his laurels. Like he attacked the offseason with a plan to fix things. We'll see if it works. I think this was a smart hire. I think, we'll see if he can unlock something in Aller we didn't see last year. I think it'll be a more open offense. It will give him, if he's capable of doing more than he did within the offense last year, I think this scheme will allow him to do that. I just have questions, to me, I think you look at this Penn State team, even with the new teams coming into the conference, I mean, it's going to be a down year, I think, for Michigan. I think, or at least a step back. Maybe this is the year that Penn State can go make a move, but, they've got questions. I mean, we've got the questions about, Aller and the offense, but also, they lost Manny Diaz going to Duke to be the head coach. They lost some key defensive pieces, most notably Chop Robinson, who's probably going to be a first-round pick in the draft. So, can they manage those losses even with, I think, an overall pretty good offseason and bringing back their starting quarterback? We'll see. But I think this is a really important year for James Franklin.
Yeah, and we talk about some of the guys that's, came back. They're coming back. You're talking about Nicholas Singleton. Who can kind of be a home run hitter. They have Katron Allen, another good running back. Julian Fleming coming over from Ohio State's an interesting one for me.
Yeah.
I kind of want to see how he looks with Aller throwing him the football. And then obviously defensively, you talk about Chop Robinson, you lose him. But you still have Abdul Carter, who's coming back for another year. So I really like to see what they can do. But yeah, I think, you get a new offensive coordinator because you need one. But you got to get a new defensive coordinator because you lost the guy. And you can't really fault him for taking a job as a head coach. But yeah, the reprieve, I guess, a little bit for Penn State this year is they only have to play Ohio State. They don't have to play Michigan, which has kind of been the kryptonite, I guess you could say, for just the job that James Franklin has done. He looks good against everybody until he plays those 2 teams. And he hadn't beaten both of them in a season, and since I think his first couple of years there in Happy Valley. So, yeah, there's a lot that's going to change, but I'm interested to see how that all comes together. But, Drew Aller getting a new offensive coordinator, I think, is the storyline I circle most. because I think that's where the biggest impact. And maybe you're right with the risk adverse type of quarterback. Maybe you take a little more chances, you get the bigger plays, which Kansas was in no shortage of when he was calling the offense over the last couple of years. And as far as Ohio State is concerned, they also have a new play caller and a new quarterback, Will Howard. Now all right, you're going to have to talk to me like I'm 5, okay? I'm going Michael Scott here. Explain to me why Will Howard is an Ohio State quarterback.
I mean, he's certainly not your typical type of Ohio State quarterback. But one thing I really push back on is the idea that this is not a clear upgrade from Kyle McCord. I think if you think that, you clearly have not watched enough of one of these two players.
I'm a Big 12 guy. I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of Will Howard. I know he's good. And I've seen Kyle McCord, and I'm not going to say he's some great quarterback. It's for me, it's just more trying to wrap my brain around the fact that he just does not look like a Ryan Day quarterback.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the fit, but yeah. But I mean, I think that Will Howard is a much better passer. I think he is can make things happen with his legs. I think that's an interesting dynamic that we haven't really seen. We don't really see Ryan Day quarterbacks do that a lot. We saw it with Fields a bit, but not to a great extent. And I think that I mean, I'll just be honest. Like, part of the reason I'm a Penn State skeptic is because this is the team they draw instead of Michigan. I am buying Ohio State hard this offseason. I am buying them hard. Like, I've already talked about the Will Howard move, but that's not the only big move they made. They got Quinshawn Judkins, one of the best running backs in the SEC.
That's my guy right there.
Yeah,
that guy.
That offense is going to be dangerous. Getting Jeremiah Smith, a 5-star recruit who looks like he could already be one of the best receivers in college football year one. I mean, and then, you also got Caleb Downs from Alabama, who I talked about a little bit earlier. I think they had the best offseason in the entire country. And I mean, to be honest, I'll just say it right now. Ryan Day, you have to win the Big Ten this year. You have to beat Michigan. You have to win the Big Ten. I don't think there's a team that's even close to them in terms of offseason outlook. I think Oregon and Washington both lose a lot. USC loses a lot. Michigan loses a lot. I don't see a team that's even close.
I'm with you, man. I'm looking at this Ohio State offense. Holy cow. I mean, you brought it up. You didn't even bring up the fact that they got Emeka Egbuka back. Like, he's a big-time playmaker. Like, he can make plays. You brought up Jeremiah Smith, Mylan Graham, Carnell Tate. I mean, they got weapons for days. So there's no excuse for Will Howard. There's no excuse. Oh, also, they went out and got a 5-star quarterback, Julian Sayin, transferred from Alabama before he ever I don't know, took a class at Alabama. I don't know. He was already in the portal. Like, he signed his letter of intent. Oh, Nick Saban's retiring. All right, I'm going to transfer to Ohio State.
Yep.
Go play with a bunch more 5-stars. Caleb Downs that was like sneaky for me, was the pickup of the offseason. I just think he's a guy who can really be a ball hawk, back end guy. He can give you some coverage. Whenever Drew Aller and Penn State play Ohio State, you better make sure you know where number 2 is.
Yeah, I mean, I think this team is loaded pretty much across the board. And I've been on the record. I am not nearly as I'm a Ryan Day guy. I like Ryan Day. I think Ryan Day is a great coach. I think he's been the victim of some bad circumstances in the last few years. With that being said, this team has no excuses.
We didn't even get to the fact that Chip Kelly is running the offense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't even brush over that. They went and got who I think is one of the best offensive minds in college football still. Just convinced him to leave what is now a conference rival to come be your offensive coordinator. Unbelievable.
And, I think based on the offseason and kind of the conversations around Chip Kelly, I felt like he wanted to be a coordinator. Like, he was like, I'm done being a head coach. Let me just call plays. That's all.
I think he tried to get multiple NFL gigs before he ultimately accepted this one. So,
So, I mean, Ryan Day gets to be the benefactor of it, right? He can kind of take his hands off the offense a little bit, focus more on the team aspect of it. So that's going to be interesting. But we've talked about the Big Ten. I want to circle back we're going back to the SEC. We got the LSU Tigers up next. Now, this is interesting because when you look at who they have to replace, you had a Heisman winner at quarterback. You had a guy who could easily have won the Heisman as a wide receiver with Malik Neighbors. Brian Thomas Jr., who just exploded this year.
Led the nation in receiving touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, that Neighbors and Thomas was an electric duo. And so you got to replace those three guys. And then on the defensive side, you get rid of Matt House. You bring in Blake Baker, who was there before, went to Missouri. They bring him back to run the defense. You're going to be losing some guys there. But this is a team that defense has really got to step up, which I know everybody's going to be paying attention to the offense. And can, Garrett Nussmeier be the guy that replaces Jaden? Garrett Nussmeier's a guy I've been beating that drum for several years now, and just because I think a lot of us, when Jaden Daniels came in, I don't think any of us knew that Jaden Daniels was going to be that good, and he proved why people were high on him, but we didn't really see that at Arizona State. But I'm excited to see what Nussmeier can do.
Yeah, I mean, not only did we not see it at Arizona State, we really didn't even see it in his first year at LSU. I mean, we saw flashes of it, but no one thought he was going to have the year in 2023 that he had. So big shoes to fill for Garrett Nussmeier for sure. And a big offseason overall for this program, I think. It's a really key year for Brian Kelly going into year 3. Successful. Hard to argue that he hasn't had a successful first 2 years, but I also don't think it's quite in line with what the expectations for this program are. He set the tenure a little early, with that Alabama win. I think, you got to prove that you can actually compete for national titles here. And a lot of change. Like I said, new coordinators on both sides of the ball. After moving on from Matt House, you got Blake Baker in. Also, Mike Denbrock goes to take the same position as OC at Notre Dame. Now you're promoting from within Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton, who are already on the staff, to be co-OCs. So, the hope is that there's going to be a good amount of continuity offensively, at least, from a scheme perspective. From a personnel perspective, it won't be. I mean, they're losing a lot. We've talked about it. And it's not like the cupboard's bare. They have guys, Kyron Lacey, Chris Hilton, guys who have shown flashes at receiver of making some really nice plays, just didn't get the targets with all the talent that LSU has had over the last few years. They went out and got CJ Daniels, one of the best receiver transfers in the country from Liberty. They have pieces, but I think it really boils down to the defense, because Garrett Nussmeier could be great. And based on the flashes he showed, I think it's fair to expect he's going to be pretty good. But he's probably not going to be as good as the outgoing Heisman quarterback they just had, who led the nation in pretty much every offensive category. So assuming that's not the case, this defense is going to have to take a step forward if this is, if you're going to get back to winning 10, 11 games this year. And it's a big question mark. I mean, they didn't do a lot in the offseason in the portal. They still have some really big holes, I think, particularly at corner and on the defensive line. Those are areas where I really don't know what the outlook looks like there. So I think offensively, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I think that that's probably the least of the concerns for this team right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think defensively is where it's going to be. That's where you're going to either make or break this team. They have experience, Major Burns back there, which I know they've been talking about him in spring ball. If he can stay healthy, I think that helps. Obviously, having Harold Perkins, they're going to have somebody else step up and kind of be that other premier pass rusher. I think that's going to be their key, because if you're relying on the corners to really step up, it's a double-edged sword. You need the pass rush to help the corners to help the pass rush. So they're going to need it from both sides of that. But, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think I'm as worried with Nussmeier. He's a guy who worked with Sloan last year. I mean, Sloan is familiar with him. He knows what he can do. We'll see how he kind of incorporates this offense around him. But definitely Garrett Nussmeier is definitely a guy to pay attention to, and we'll see how CJ Daniels and that crew look, with the wide receivers. Obviously, you talk about Shelton Sampson, top-tier recruit. You have Aaron Anderson, who transferred from Alabama, who was originally committed to LSU, went to Alabama, transferred back. So we'll see if he kind of gets a bigger role this year. But LSU looks like a team that has a lot of questions too, and I don't think it's near like anybody's worried about Brian Kelly, like his job is in jeopardy one bit. But they're a team that I look at and I don't really know where my expectations should be.
Yeah, and that's totally fair. I think it's hard to say because I think last year was pretty disappointing. A team that began the year in the top 5 had a good year, not a bad year by any stretch, but a lot of people thought this team was going to go from winning the West to maybe now they're competing for a playoff spot. Well, neither of those things happened. So now you're kind of back to the drawing board after everything you lose. And I think, you talked about the offense, the receivers, the quarterback. I think they really need to get a lot more production out of their ground game. They haven't had to lean on the running backs too much the last couple of years because Jaden Daniels is so productive on the ground. He was at that, an 1,100-yard rusher in 2023. You're not going to get that from Nussmeier. So, they're going to really have to find a way to manufacture some yards on the ground in a way that they haven't the first 2 years with Brian Kelly.
Yeah, they definitely haven't had a guy who they could just turn around and hand the ball off to, and he's going to get you 4 or 5 yards pop in a while. So LSU definitely got some questions to answer. Miami seems like they always have questions to answer. They're a team that I feel like we hype them up every offseason, and then they disappoint. Going into this year, they're not going to have any excuses to disappoint because they went out and got Cameron Ward, probably one of the best quarterbacks in the transfer market, after a disappointing first year at the Power 5 level. I almost said 4. Power 5 level. He had a bounce back year last year with Washington State, and now he goes to Miami with higher expectations. But I think he's a guy who could probably carry this program. I'm not going to say back into what they used to be, but further than they've been in a while.
Yeah, this is a weird one because it felt like such a no-brainer, right? When they made the hire. I mean, it was so obvious on paper. Seemed like, the kind of move. If anyone was going to go into Miami and bring it back to what it's been, it seemed like this would be the guy. And it just hasn't really come together yet. I think there's promising, there's some promising elements here. They're recruiting really well. He's recruited well throughout the time he's been there. And that's why, as you come into year 3, this kind of just has to be the year where it starts to come together because you've got the talent. And I think, you get Cam Ward, a guy who was one of the top, transfer quarterbacks in the country, almost went to the NFL, initially decided to, then opted to transfer back, opted to transfer to Miami. That was huge for them because their quarterback situation was pretty dire going into next season prior to that. And you're just running out of excuses, I think, for Mario Cristobal. I'd say maybe other than Billy Napier on the hottest seat in the Power 5 right now. And guess who he opens the season with? They go to Florida. They play the Gators in Gainesville. So I think that's a very early season, anxiety bowl kind of situation. I think whoever loses that game is in serious jeopardy. Serious jeopardy. The vibes are going to be bad. I think it's, if you're Miami, if you're Mario Cristobal, you can't afford to lose that game if you are going to compete, to win the ACC this year, which I think is the expectation for everyone there.
And they better hope that they get some production out of that free safety after losing Cameron Kitchens to the NFL, ball hawking guy who got his hand on pretty much anything that went in the vicinity. So I think they're definitely going to miss that guy on the back end. We'll see how Savion Riley does. I think he's kind of the guy they kind of penciled in as that single high type of guy. They're gonna definitely miss him. But yeah, I think everything points to Cam Ward, and then obviously they're going to lose Leonard Taylor on the interior of that defensive line, which is going to be massive. But yeah, you're right. I think anxiety bowl. That's probably the best way to describe that game against Florida.
Yeah, I think. If you're Florida and lose, I think to me, the Billy Napier era is all but done if they lose that game. And that's a bit extreme to say after week 1. But when you look at, again, we're not going to read the schedule off, but when you look at what's left on that schedule, it's hard to imagine they have anywhere near the kind of season that they need to have for Billy Napier to stick around if they don't begin the year by beating Miami. And you could really turn around to Miami and say the opposite for that. You say the same thing for them. I think Mario Cristobal is not in quite as much danger coming into this year, but if you come out and go 5-7 or 6-6, I think absolutely we could be having those conversations come November.
Oh, absolutely. Because after Miami, I'm just going to bring it up because I looked. You do get a reprieve in week 2 with Sanford.
The same Sanford team that put up 600 yards on the Gators a couple years ago in the Swamp.
Yeah. I think that was the same team. Hopefully that defense plays a little better. But then you have Texas A&M, Mississippi State, UCF, and then Tennessee. Not a great.
And that's, by the way, it's a backloaded schedule. That's the easy part. That's the easy part of the schedule. And
it still looks rough. Looks rough. Okay, final segment of the show. We're finally on the 12th pack of the 12 pack. Kentucky. Then we're going back to Kentucky, but this time we're going to talk football. No longer are we going to have to hear the jokes about football and basketball not agreeing in Lexington. Brock Vandagriff, one of the 3 5-star quarterbacks that were just basically sitting there for the, ready to play at Georgia. I guess he had got tired of waiting. Carson Beck obviously was returning. So Brock Vandagriff heads off to Kentucky. He was having to replace Devin Leary, which is surprising to me because Devin Leary was a big disappointment, considering what I saw him do at North Carolina State. I thought this was a home run transfer. It didn't work out. So we're gonna have a redo. Okay. I think Brock Vandagriff can be a guy. I'm not gonna say he's gonna be a home run, but I think he's a guy who can kind of elevate this offense in a way that we thought we were going to see last year.
I mean, I think that's certainly a possibility. And congratulations to Mark Stoops on outlasting John Calipari in the Battle of the Titans of legendary Kentucky coaches. But, it's hard for me, honestly, to get super enthused about the Brock Vandagriff thing. Not because I don't think he's good. I think he has potential. I think you really nailed it with Devin Leary. I thought that was a great move. I thought that was a move that was going to work out fantastic, not just because of what Devin Leary had done when healthy at NC State, but also because they were bringing back Liam Cohen from the Rams, a really bright offensive mind who did great things with Will Levis the first year that he had him there. And we saw Levis kind of drop off without him. That for whatever reason, that just did not really work last year. I think Leary was very limited, and I'm not quite sure why. And it makes me wonder a little bit if those things might be a little bit systemic for Kentucky. And so you look at a guy in Vandagriff who's more talented than Leary was, a former 5-star recruit, but also a guy who's only attempted 21 passes in 3 years. Like, is this the guy that's going to take Kentucky from being, the level of consistent we've seen them be for the last 6-7 years to the next level of competing to win the SEC East? Or I guess the SEC East doesn't exist anymore, but you know what I mean? Being at the upper echelon of the conference. I just don't know. It's kind of hard for me to buy that. New offensive coordinator coming in, Bush Hamden from Boise State, not a bad hire. I'm not criticizing it. I don't know if I think last year was the year I really thought this team was going to take the leap. And the fact that they didn't, I just don't know about this.
I kind of look at it like this. I think when you have a key, you have a new quarterback coming in, you need to have something that they can kind of rely on, like one of the weapons. And I think the job that Dane Key does and what he can do, kind of gives me a little more, I guess I can be a little more positive about it. Now, I don't think Kentucky's going to go out there and win the SEC by any means. But I do think they might be slightly better than they were a year ago. And has anybody asked, Liam Cohen, if he just likes coming in every other year and leaving? Do they just need to set up a special contract for him?
Yeah. Just to be clear, because I didn't say it, Liam Cohen went back to the NFL. He's the Bucs OC now. So
right. After 1 year with Kentucky, before that he was with the LA Rams, and before that he was with Kentucky. So homie needs glue.
He just uses Kentucky to get him, and whenever the NFL thing goes awry, he just uses Kentucky to get him a new job, get him a job back.
I don't know if you would have watched that Kentucky offense. I don't know that I would have hired him, but
yeah, we'll see how that goes with Baker.
So they're used to subpar quarterback play. But that's going to do it for this edition of the College 12 Pack. We will not be back next week, but we will be back the week after as we get you ready for the NFL draft. All that wrapping up. Can't believe April was just flying. But Tyler and Patrick, we'll see.